Afternoon, everyone. My name is Kyle Mox. I am the Fulbright Program Advisor for Arizona State University, Associate Dean for National Scholarships and Director of the Office of National Scholarships Advisement. This is the next part, I've lost count, part two or part three of our Fulbright Friday series. So at the start of every application cycle, we like to get a little deeper into topics having to do with Fulbright. And today's session is going to be talking about how to cultivate effective references. All Fulbright applications require 3 references, and we have some strategies we'd like to share about how to make those as effective as possible. Joining me today to explore that topic further are Dr. Lori Stoff, who is one of the ONSA faculty mentors, and Dr. Jackie Scott Lynch, also another Barrett faculty member and a former ONSA faculty mentor, and both of whom write excellent letters of recommendation and are wonderful mentors. So I can't wait to hear their perspectives. For just a little background information, if you haven't been to one of our previous sessions or you're just getting started with Fulbright, just know that this is the oldest and largest international exchange program in existence. It's a Department of State program, so this is a .gov program, and it gives about 2,000 grants a year to support academic year-long programs, usually 9 or 10 months. And these programs would fund a study experience, independent research, teaching experience, even the pursuit of an art. And there's over 140 countries to choose from. So yeah, this is a large program, and there's a lot of variables to consider. So the most common question we get is like, how much do you get? And like, well, it really depends on where you're going and what you're doing, but enough for you to live a comfortable student lifestyle. So all travel and living expenses are funded. Whatever questions we have about Fulbright are generally going to come back to the core mission, right? The core mission of Fulbright is to promote cultural exchange and promote mutual understanding. So whether you're teaching, whether you are pursuing research, whether you're learning how to play the didgeridoo, whatever you're doing, you are there as an ambassador, and you're there to help promote exchange across cultural boundaries. So if you're never unsure about what direction to go in the application process, just remember that. Now, in terms of timeline, we're obviously at the left end of this arrow of time. The application just opened on April 2. So we're just right at the start of the next cycle. And this is for grants that would take place during the 25-26 academic year. So the middle bit there is this summer. We're working towards a September 10 campus deadline. So between now and September 10, the expectation is you're working on your application materials, drafting essays, working with ONSA, working with your mentors, going to our workshops, going to peer review, and of course, getting your references arranged. The 2 main flavors of Fulbright are the ETA, or the English Teaching Assistant, and Open Study Research. And within Open Study Research, there are a couple of subtypes. You can pursue a graduate degree, you can pursue a creative performing art, or maybe there are some awards specifically in that country that are unique to that country. Like there's one in gastronomic sciences in Italy. It sounds torturous. One thing to pay attention to, all Fulbright awards require 3 references. The ETAs are reference forms, and all of the Open Study Research awards are letters of reference. So it's an important difference that we'll unpack a bit more in a moment. The references will get submitted directly to the online application. If you've worked with other awards that we manage, maybe you're used to them coming to us first, but because of the scale of this program, it's easier if the letters just simply references get uploaded to your online application. They will be confidential. You're asked to check a box waiving your right to see those, and if you apply through us, you also sign a waiver where you'll waive your right to see those. And there's a whole page under the applicants tab about this, about what actually goes into this, but it's pretty straightforward. We will see them on our end and be able to work with the applicants, or excuse me, the writers of those references. So we cannot undersell how important the references are to the application itself. I would say they matter as much as the rest of the application, because the people reading these applications are the peers of the people writing your references. They're probably pretty similar in terms of background. They're pretty similar in terms of career. They're probably all educators in some way. And so they're looking for a credible evaluation of you. And so these matter quite a bit. The way that we look at them, they don't just support the app, they extend the application. So there are some things that you can say about yourself and other people cannot. And there are other things that you cannot say about yourself. You can't talk about how amazing you are in your application, right? But somebody writing a letter can brag about how amazing you are. Ideally, what these letters would do is provide firsthand observation of you doing things relevant to the Fulbright project. So great letters of reference would come from faculty who have taught you in class or supervised your research, people that have supervised you in volunteer or service opportunities, bosses at work in important jobs, things like that. But they can say, I've seen this person do these things, and I think they'd be wonderful at being a Fulbrighter for the following reasons. In terms of what are they looking for in Fulbright, you will not find a set list of clear-cut criteria. They have selection preferences, but based on our experience in working with Fulbrighters, there are some characteristics that I think mark a strong candidate. First and foremost is flexibility and adaptability, so much so that this is a running joke, right? You have to be prepared for the unprepared situation, expect the unexpected, all those other cliches. But you're going abroad to a foreign country for 10 months, more than a year from now. Like, you have to be flexible and adaptable. Obviously, because this is a cultural exchange opportunity, you need to be open-minded. You need to be able to work with people that aren't like you. You need to be able to meet people where they're at, even though you might be from a very different background. And you have to be the sort of person who takes initiative and has some leadership ability. If you're waiting for permission or you're waiting for other people to give you instructions, this might not be a pleasant experience for you. You've got to be the first person to come out, smile, and shake a hand, right? To that end, you still have to be humble. You still have to show humility and respect for your hosts and the cultures. But that's the foundation of that humility would also be curiosity. I think curiosity probably undergirds any good Fulbright application. There's something that you want to know more about, and you have to be able to overcome adversity and challenge, because it will be a challenging situation. I think if you talk to any Fulbrighter, they'll probably have some story about something disastrous that happened that turned out to be not that bad. But be aware of who you are, what you're trying to accomplish, have confidence in yourself. And I think above all else, a sense of humor probably helps with all of these other things. So Dr. Stoff, Dr. Scott Lynch, would you add anything to this list, or have you noticed these characteristics in great Fulbright applicants that you've worked with?
I'm pausing for you.
Oh, thank you. So I would say that the component that Dr. Mox referred to with regard to respect and humility is really important. The way you present yourself as somebody curious about another culture and willing to engage in mutual cultural exchange should not come off as sort of white savior type of approach, where you're going to go in and you're going to bring some kind of knowledge or expertise to people who somehow can't do things on their own. So there's a balance that you want to achieve. You want to be very curious and you want to learn from others. You want to be able to represent your own version of American culture in a way that that promotes this kind of mutual cultural exchange, but you want to do it in a way that is culturally sensitive and does not come off as, I'm going to tell you how you should do things.
Very well put.
I agree with all that. I don't have too much to add, or really anything other than to say it will be an opportunity for reflection when you're there, and you'll ultimately likely come away with an even sharper understanding of American culture, or even your own version within American culture. So the open-mindedness, the respect, the humility, these are all vital for success.
As the noted anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss said, I travel not to understand other cultures, but to understand my own. So I mentioned early on that there's a slight difference in the format of the references. So if you're applying for the English Teaching Assistant Award, your references will complete a form. This form is easily accessible. We'll have it in our materials. You can find it on the Fulbright site. And it's a series of short questions. And my suggestion is, as you're considering your references, read through a blank reference form and ask yourself, could the people I'm thinking of have good answers for all of these questions? The forms are going to talk about your ability to overcome challenges, any kind of qualities you have that would make you a good teacher or mentor, your social skills, the ability to work in unstructured environments, that if you would be a good ambassador for the US, and if you have maturity, adaptability, flexibility, and relevant experience. So as you start to think about that, maybe you've got a favorite professor that has written letters for you before. Maybe they haven't seen you in a teaching situation, or they haven't seen you in an unstructured environment, only a structured environment. And so be thinking about that, and maybe there's some out of the box options for you, supervisor or a volunteer experience or something like that. In fact, Fulbright suggests that one of the ETA references not be an academic reference. They would like to see, again, you working in unstructured environments. Now, as far as the study research letters go, these are generally 1 to 2 page letters that are going to talk about your ability to execute the project that you've proposed. So it's very important that the people that are writing your references know what it is you're proposing to do. If these are just general, yes, they're very nice, they're very good. They're not going to be as effective as, yes, I reviewed the project proposal and I think this is excellent, and I especially think they're qualified to do it. They can talk about your background, how well prepared you are in terms of methodologies or the basic education you need to do the project, and also helpful if they can talk about your personal characteristics. So yeah, as a tax-paying citizen, I would be happy to send this person abroad to represent the U.S. And again, chances are good if you're proposing a standalone research project, you're going to get some input and help from mentors in your field. So therefore, they should read your proposal and be able to comment on it in the letters of reference. For those of you thinking about graduate degree awards, ideally you would have consulted people in your field on the program selection, and they can say, yes, I'm well aware of this program at this university. It's a high quality program. I think they're very well prepared for the following reasons. They'll actually get uploaded, normal sort of letterhead, things like that. And we have instructions that you can give to your faculty members, as well as the instructions that come out from Fulbright themselves. The most common question then is like, who do they want to hear from? And as I mentioned before, most people like to hear from people they consider peers, but the checklist is, one, they should know you well. I've talked to students before who's like, oh, I can get a letter from the mayor of Tempe. I met him at a barbecue once. I'm like, well, that may not be the best letter, as opposed to somebody who's worked with you for 1 or 2 years, working on a research project. They should be relevant to the context, meaning that they have something useful to say, re Fulbright. They can share information, they can give examples of things you've done. And again, they have a title or status that is relevant or credible to the reader. Fulbright is not an award that cares too much about titles, right? There are some fellowships out there that, unless you're a tenured track faculty member, they might not take this seriously. Fulbright isn't so, shall we say, snooty. They just want to know from somebody that works with students for a living, or that has supervised a lot of people, that has worked in similar situations, to say, yeah, based on my years of experience, I think this is a good applicant. So as we're thinking about that, the best references are one that can provide concrete details or examples, that are actually going to take the time to write with enthusiasm or interest, and speaks to the specific context of the fellowship. What advice would we have as students are thinking about whom to approach for letters? Would we add to this, or are there other tricks or advice that you've given to students in the past?
Well, one thing is to think carefully about how each recommender can complement what the other recommenders can provide. So looking for recommenders who've seen you in different types of things would be much better, even if you had 2 professors who would say you're the most extraordinary critical thinker that they've met in 10 years. If they're saying the same thing, that I think that's less powerful than one person saying that wonderful thing and another talking about your leadership outside the classroom or what have you. So that's one thing that comes to mind.
That's really good advice. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate how important it is to let that person talk about you as a person, not just as a student. That Fulbright is really interested in you as a human being. And so the professor who knows that you do excellent work in their class, that always gets A's, that submits everything on time, but doesn't really know anything about you individually, is maybe not the best person. Now, you might be worried that you don't have professors who do know you well. It is perfectly acceptable for you to approach a professor and ask them if they're willing to write for you, but first give them an opportunity to get to know you better, to provide them with the context that will allow them to speak to your personal qualities, because that is really essential for Fulbright.
Good advice. Yeah, and we'll talk a bit more in a minute about, how to actually make the ask, right? Which is the thing that many students struggle with. An important distinction to make is between academic references and non-academic references. And that's a distinction that you'll find in a lot of fellowships, a lot of different contexts. So pay attention when people are asking for academic references. Fulbright applicants often ask, how many academic references should I have? And from my point of view, it really matters it depends on what the project is. So if you are proposing a highly academic project where you are doing high-level research, or you're enrolling in a graduate degree or something like that, I would expect that at least 2 of the letters, if not all 3, are academic references. On the other hand, if your project is more service-oriented, or you're doing the ETA or something else like that, then maybe we don't need all of them to be academic references, maybe just 1, perhaps 2. So again, it's really going to depend on what the nature of your proposal is. But when we're talking about academic references, we're talking about any faculty members that are teaching at the university, at ASU. Current students often ask, do all of my letters have to come from ASU faculty members? Absolutely not, right? If you had a summer research experience at another university or you transferred, that's perfectly acceptable. There's no rule that says it has to be ASU faculty. But they ideally have recently taught you or supervised your research. So sometimes people are always digging up letters and just kind of reusing the first letter from their first year where they had a good professor. That could work. But if you're applying as a graduating senior or as a recent graduate, one might wonder, have they not encountered another faculty member in 3 years? That being said, as Dr. Stoff was just pointing out, make sure that the faculty members know you well. And we get many great letters, particularly from Barrett faculty members who have stayed in contact with students from first year, or they've gone back on a regular basis, or they continue to consult them as a mentor. Manage that relationship. Ideally, they're in a discipline relevant to the project. And so if you're proposing to do research in linguistics, but you're getting a letter of recommendation from your multivariate calculus professor, one might wonder how much of relevance do they have to say about this project. In a perfect world, yeah, we'd want higher ranks, people that have more experience, people that have mentored many more students. But again, the title itself is not as important as it might be for other fellowships. We would encourage you, however, to avoid teachers in training, if that makes sense, right? So for academic references, graduate students, PhD students, people like that are still students themselves, but maybe teaching you or tutoring you might not be the best options, and we can talk about ways to make that work. Non-academic references would be anyone that hasn't taught you or supervised your research, and that might be a professional that has supervised you in some professional capacity, and that could be from an internship, or maybe they're your actual employer, faculty advisors for clubs or organizations that you're in. And as I pointed out before, at least one of your references, if you're an ETA applicant, should be non-academic. So start thinking laterally about that. People not to ask: your high school teachers, right? Those have reached their expiration date, I'm afraid. Unless, of course, you continue to work with them if you've gone back and taught in the class or maintained a relationship. But 95% of the time, that's stale. We need some updated references. A lot of applicants will say, oh, well, I want to get somebody to come into my leadership. I'm going to ask my vice president from the student org. These readers are not going to consider other students or your peers to be credible in terms of writing letters of recommendation. Even if they say wonderful things about you, even if they know you very well, their frame of reference and their means of comparison is not that substantial. This might be the first and only letter they've ever written. They've not supervised hundreds of other students, so it's not going to help as much as you think it will. And obviously, don't write it yourself. And of course, why would anyone do this? It happens quite often where folks who are asked to write these references say, I'm awfully busy. Could you just write this for me and I'll sign off on it? We strongly discourage that practice, not only because it's unethical, because it also isn't very effective, right? There's a reason why you've asked this person, because they are experienced at writing letters like this and offering evaluation. So we do have some strategies to deal with it. How have you all worked with this in the past? Because I know we've all encountered it at some point. The student says, oh yeah, they just asked me to write the letter and they'd sign it. How do you counsel a student through that?
So that does happen quite a bit. And I usually tell students that while they can provide the recommender with copious information about themselves. They can bullet point as many things that they'd like to see the recommendation highlight, that the recommender needs to write it themselves. And if they're too busy to do it, then perhaps maybe we need to think about another faculty member or recommender that would be willing to give the time. That might be a sign that maybe this person isn't as invested in writing for you if they say, I really don't have time for you. So you might want to rethink who you're asking, but under no circumstances should you ever write a letter, as Dr. Mock said, that is 100% unethical. I would also just like to add to this list, do not ask a family member. That is also a no-no. Even if your uncle is the mayor of Tempe and knows you very well, please do not do that.
And to add to that, there may be situations where you, as the applicant, I'm sorry if there's any background noise, if you as the applicant feel that you might even be able to write a better letter for whatever reason, if your writer is not a native English speaker, or if you've had success in the past writing for yourself. I don't know if that's the case, but that can happen. But what someone outside of yourself can provide is something that you can't, which is really how they view you in the wider context of all the students they've taught before who have gone on to be successful at Fulbright or other things like that. And so don't assume, I think, that they're too busy, and make sure that you're willing, as Dr. Stoff said, we're going to show you how to make their job easy.
So I hope by now you've understood a strong reference should be credible, meaning that the audience that's reading these applications would value what they have to say because of who they are. It's relevant to what it is you're proposing to do, and timely in that it's as recent as possible. It's a recent interaction because we're in the now, we're applying right now, and they'd like to know what you've done lately. So, how do we make the ask? One, obviously you want to approach well in advance. The normal polite zone is 4 to 6 weeks before the deadline. So our campus deadline is September 10th. At that point, we need references in place. Taking into account that we have summer and many faculty members disappear entirely in the summer, you might want to start laying the groundwork as soon as possible. But we want to give 4 to 6 weeks in advance. Does that mean most people spend 4 to 6 weeks writing letters? Absolutely not. I usually write mine right at the last minute, like every other good faculty member. But I know that student asked me a month ago, and I promised I would do it. And so I'm going to put good effort into this, right? I suggest take what I call a two-step approach, or perhaps more steps, but a two-step approach means that you don't just bombard them with an email that has 6 attachments, like here are the drafts of my application, here's my CV, here's all this other stuff. Will you write for me, yes or no? Instead, I think you'd want to manage that relationship to say, hey, I really enjoyed the class last semester. I miss you terribly. Could we schedule a time to talk? I'm thinking about applying for Fulbright. I would love your input on that. Or at the very least, if you know they're on board already, say, I'm applying for Fulbright. Do you think you'd be in or not? So make the first hurdle a very easy yes. And then beyond that, then you can provide additional information or be more serious. The packet is all of those attachments I mentioned, right? You want to give them, of course, your resume. You want to give them your transcripts. Writing samples, anything that you did for them in the class are always very helpful. And of course, as we get into the process, you want to share with them copies of your statement of grant purpose and your personal statement so they know what they're talking about here. And I appreciate reminders. I tell students who ask me for letters, don't be afraid to remind me. As we get closer, do it once a week until I've done it. And years ago, I had a student ask for a recommendation 6 weeks out and then never said another word. And the only time she spoke to me again was after the deadline had passed and I had not written a letter for her because, again, it was more than a month and it fell off my to-do list. She was upset and I was upset with myself, but also with her. And then I come to find out that the other 2 people that were supposed to write to her did the same thing because she did not follow up with any of us. So again, gentle reminders are appreciated, I think, by most faculty members. We just say, make it quick. And of course, be polite and professional in all correspondence, unless they've overtly given you permission to call them by their first names, make sure you're using titles and make sure that you are saying please and thank you a lot, because they are giving you their most valuable resource, which is time. That's the most valuable thing for, especially for academics. Yeah.
Can I jump in on the
Mhm.
gentle reminders?
Yeah.
Like as a writer myself, when a student asks, we pull up the calendar, and I will say, if you, this is when I expect to draft it. This is when I really expect to draft it. And then, if you haven't heard from me by then, please check in. I'm asking you to do that so you don't have to feel worried at all. But so that helps us like work together. But the thing is, if someone says, okay, thank you for asking me 4 weeks in advance, I'm going to write it 1 week in advance, don't check in before they have said they're going to write it. I just want to put more details in the gentle reminders, not weekly. No, we know it's on there, but if you share the responsibility for getting that letter in, that's a helpful way to do it. So when you're meeting with your, after the short email, can you write a strong letter or not, and then the follow-up or a meeting with the material you're going to provide them from with, you can ask, would it be helpful if I check in with you like on such and such a date?
And I think Dr. Scott Lynch also brings up a really good point about the possibility of having an in-person meeting, or maybe a Zoom, if as things may be, especially if it's a faculty member you haven't had a class with for quite some time. We teach a lot of students. We try to remember them, but we don't always. And sometimes if you get an email from a student as a faculty member, you might not recognize the name. But if you say, hey, let's have a meeting, or are you available to have a meeting so we can discuss this? And the student then comes in for an in-person or a Zoom meeting, then you see the person's face and you're like, oh, now I remember so much more about this person. It's also just, again, a great way to spend a little time with the faculty member to give them more insight into who you are, and who you've become. Again, if you haven't had a class with them for a little while, obviously, students undergo a tremendous amount of growth during their undergraduate academic careers. You're not the same person you were as a first-year student as you are as a third-year student. And so getting that time with the professor to kind of catch them up is really valuable.
Absolutely. Wonderful advice. So as we've been inferring here, there is a certain way to phrase this question. I would discourage you from asking, can you write me a letter of reference, or could you write me a letter of reference? That's a yes or no answer, right? And most faculty members, if you're asking faculty members, are going to say, yeah, sure, because they're helper people. They want to help, right? Even if in their minds, like, I don't even really remember who the student was, or wow, that was a long time ago. So they would be reluctant to say no, but maybe you want to give them an escape route if necessary. So a better way to ask is, do you feel you could write me a strong letter of reference for my Fulbright application? So you're specifying that you want a strong letter from them if they feel like they're comfortable with doing that. You want to give them a context for the Fulbright. And to me, one of the things that really helps is I wanted to ask you because blank. And then you can talk a lot about my ambassadorial potential. You can talk a lot about my academic abilities. You can talk a lot about my leadership. Give them an assignment, right? Because that actually makes my job much easier to know, okay, I don't need to cover everything about this student. My job is just to write about X. And I will say no on a regular basis when students approach me because I don't feel I'm credible, relevant, or timely. I had a student who took a 1 credit hour class with me 3 years ago, wanted to know if I could write a letter for her med school application. And I just said, I will, but I don't think it will be helpful because the interaction was not that sustained. It was a long time ago. And I don't think I observed anything that would help me make an argument that you would be an excellent position. And she understood, and we worked it out. We talked through some other options. So it's in your best interest to give them an escape route to say no. And if it's generally because they don't feel like they're the right choice or the right person to do this, not because they're just grumpy or they don't like you or something like that. So does that work for you all, or do you have preferred ways that you counsel students to do this?
I think that's a great way to approach it. I will immediately respond to the student and say, I'm very happy to do this for you. If I feel that I can write a strong letter, but then I will ask them for more information. Please send me your resume, your transcripts, bullet points, and things you want to address. And then if I haven't seen them for a while, I usually ask them to come in and meet with me.
Yeah.
Same. And another reason there for not providing all of your material at once, you might think, oh, this is better. It's just one email. It will be better for the person receiving, but it's better to get that short question so that we don't feel overwhelmed. And imagine, just put yourself in the audience's places for that email. How would you feel if you got a 2-page single-spaced email when you're feeling very hectic at the end of the semester or what have you? So yeah, I just want to underscore that 2-step process that we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to jump in real
ahead.
quick about end of the semester.
Yeah.
I once had a student who asked me for a letter about 3 or 4 days before an opportunity that they were trying to apply for at the end of the semester. And I said, I'm really sorry. I just cannot fit that into my schedule. And the student's response was, oh, I didn't think that professors would be busy at the end of the semester.
Oh,
so timing is really important. Please don't do that to us. Like, we are as busy as you are, if not more. And so just be very respectful of our time.
Dr. Mox, I have to jump in again too, because a student once asked me on Thanksgiving for a letter of recommendation that was due Monday. And that didn't represent that student's awareness very well. So timing is super important.
And shame on you for checking your email on Thanksgiving. Now, I really like it when a student, lays out a timeline too, so we make that initial agreement and like, great, well, I'll follow up in 2 weeks with further instructions and some additional materials. I'm so happy you're able to do this. Wonderful. And like I said, we aren't going to spend 4 to 6 weeks writing the letter, but we have to budget our time, right? Faculty members have to look very far ahead in terms of how they're going to spend things. Most of the faculty members I speak with, say writing a strong letter of recommendation could be anywhere between 1 and 3 hours of work if you're going to write a really good one. And the good news is that this is a student that you're really committed to. That letter might get used more than once, but just know, like, I need to find that time in the next 4 weeks to write, that 2 hours to write that letter for the student. So, stay in communication with them. Make sure that you're sharing with them your updated application materials. Again, your application essays. I think it's helpful if you say, if you're sharing materials, and like, I would love to have any feedback you could provide on this proposal or this personal statement. And then they actually get more committed to the overall application. Do anything you can to help, right? They should not have to work or strain or find an email address or know anything except what buttons to press when they're done. And gratitude helps a lot, and I've seen this practice happening more frequently, where at the end of a thesis cycle, like, we have a table where we get out thank you cards. We're happy to provide thank you cards to students. I love thank you cards, right? I like it that a student took the time to sit down and handwrite a simple note. I've got 3 shelves in my office just full of nothing but thank you cards. Gifts are great too, but in this economy, who knows? But taking that time to actually, say, I appreciate what you did for me, it means a lot, because that's actually what a lot of people are working for, right? But also keep them in the loop. I am surprised at how often I speak to faculty members. They're like, so whatever happened to Jane? Did she ever get that thing? So once you got the letter and sent off the application, you didn't tell them that you wanted or didn't get it. And I know sometimes applicants are like, well, I was kind of embarrassed. They did all that work and I want to let them know they failed. Like, no, not getting an award is just one more type of feedback. That's not failure. There's more to the story. They want to know the outcome of what happened and what they can do to help you on to the next stage. Excuse me. So in terms of other resources as well, we have a memorandum of guidance once you are fully invested into our application process. So after you've opened an application for Fulbright, we'll give you access to our Canvas. And in there, we have a memorandum of guidance that you can actually give to your faculty members that spells out a bit more about what this audience is and what the details are, and helps them write better letters, we hope. The Fulbright page itself has a lot of resources. And once you add them to your online application, they will get a communication from the application that gives them more information about how this works. And of course, we're here to help. Anytime a faculty member has questions about how to best write a letter, how to approach this, how to deal with any part of the application, we're happy to talk to them and often do that, right? Every cycle, I meet faculty members who are like, I really want to help this student. Can you take a look at this letter for me and tell me if it's working? And that's a great sign. That's a great sign. So if you haven't done so already, one of the first things you'll need to do is an intake meeting. And this is the start of the process itself. We'll make sure you understand the different grant types and award types, strategies for picking a country, just how to navigate the system, because it's a very big program, a lot of options out there. And so you can go to our website, onsa.asu.edu, and there's a very clear appointment tab right there that you can select, and you want to pick one of those 3 types of intake awards. If you're not sure which award you want to pursue, just pick one, and that's fine, right? We'll talk through it and we'll figure out the details later. Excuse me. If you haven't visited already, Fulbright.asu.edu lays out our whole timeline. There's some introductory videos there that kind of break down this complicated program into smaller steps. And of course, the main site to be paying attention to is the US Fulbrightonline.org site, which is all the information you need about Fulbright. So thank you to our guests for their time. Any other thoughts, comments, any other advice you would give for students as they're trying to think through, first, who should I ask? Two, how should I ask them? And 3, how do I work with them to produce a great letter?
I have 2 tips for the third item there in terms of what to provide to the recommender to partner with them and make it. Then my assumption is always that everybody's busy, and I want to make it easy as possible for someone to write you a wonderful letter of recommendation, and as easy as possible for the application reviewers to select yours. And so 2 things that you can be thinking about is get a list of the desired qualities from this that Dr. Mox provided in an earlier slide. And also, for example, for the ETA, find out exactly what questions the recommender is going to be asked. And then you can provide bullets with how your recommender has directly observed you displaying those quality skills or that experience or what have you. And so they may or may not use that, but it's going to make it much easier for them to give the type of information that the review committee is looking for. And it's going to make it really easy for the writer, because they're like, oh, that's right, I did tell the student that was a model presentation, for example. So that's one thing. And actually, if you know this ahead of time, you may be able to create experiences with your recommenders so that they can talk about that. So I mean, I can, if anyone has questions, I can talk about that later. But that's one thing, is really provide the information to your recommender that is absolutely aligns with what the application is looking for. And the other one is to go back through all the feedback that has already been provided to you by that recommender. So if it is a professor, go back on Canvas and find out, look for the feedback on your writing assignments or your presentations or what have you. And sorry, someone's calling me and everything is going crazy. All right. And so then you can provide them their own words back to them. And that just makes it so much easier. So those are 2 examples.
Really helpful.
And I would just add to that there are some faculty that you may work with who are international faculty who are not from the US, and the cultures in many other countries about letters of recommendation are quite different. For example, if you ask someone from the UK to write a letter of recommendation, they might use very kind of neutral language, like this person was fine, and they think that's a great recommendation. The US culture is quite different. We usually want letters to be more effusive and enthusiastic. And so if your recommender is someone who comes from a culture where that kind of recommendation is a little bit different, you might want to have a conversation with them about what the expectations are with regard to these types of letters, just so that, again, you can present the strongest letters, especially because the first round, your audience in the Fulbright is going to be a panel of US academics, right, who will be reading it. So they will have those expectations.
And again, to reiterate, that's another great use of the memorandum of guidance, where it's not you telling them what to do, it's us giving them helpful advice and you presenting that to them, about, yeah, they would like to see a letter that's more than one page, which again, in other cultures would be unusual. But again, in an American context, they like to see more detail, and a bit more enthusiasm. We're generally thought of as enthusiastic people. So good.
What do the two of you think about saying, well, here's the deadline, but the Office of National Scholarship Advisement has an internal deadline? Or I recently had a student ask me only like a week before, or it was 2 weeks before, but spring break was in the middle. And he said, well, the deadline is like the Friday during spring break. And I was like, well, I can't do it. But the deadline was actually the next week, and he was just creating this earlier deadline. So just wonder what your thoughts are.
Yes, applicants should be very clear about that. We are very clear in all of our materials that we do have a deadline that's about a month before the national deadline. The automated emails and correspondence that they will get from the application platform will say October 8th. And that every year that does create some confusion. So it's on you as the applicant to make sure that that's communicated, that we have to conduct a review of completed applications a month before the actual deadline. And yes, we do expect those letters to be in for September 10. So just keep repeating that, because you're going to see that other date popping up from time to time, and it does create confusion. Well, at this point, happy to turn it over to see if there's any questions from our participants. Always hard to read the Zoom room. So, well, wonderful. Well, if you're still thinking, give you a bit more time to think of any questions you might have. Anything else that we forgot to mention? Anything else that, or any other sort of extreme situations you can remember or coming across, or anything like that?
I'm wondering if any of the participants might want to share experiences that they've had where things did not go as well as they wanted them to with regard to asking for letters of recommendation, and that maybe we could help provide some guidance for the future.
Yeah, Michelle.
I just wanted to share that I was applying for a grant, and I had given my professor 4 to 6 weeks a heads up, and she had said that she would write or now I remember, sorry, it was for, actually I was applying to master's programs at the time, and she had agreed that she would write me 7 different letters for 7 different universities. But as time went on and my deadline was coming closer, you know, I was sending gentle reminders. And then finally, like 1 week before, she sends me an email and she just says, I'm sorry, but I can only write 2 out of the 7 letters because I just have way too much stuff going on. So that was just very shocking for me. And like, you know, how am I supposed to ask a new professor when I only have 1 week left? You know, that was really hard to navigate for me. But I ended up overcoming it because I had a really good connection with a different professor from a different institution who was willing, thankfully, to write those other 5 letters in 1 week.
Wow. I hope you got them a present. Yeah, that is a very difficult situation. I actually was in a similar situation where I had applied for my doctoral program, and one of the letters was my previous department head. And as a master's student, I had taken a seminar with him. I had taken an independent study with him that I had designed myself. He later hired me as a faculty member after a couple years out. And I wrote him a letter of support for a campus-wide teaching award that he won, and he was very grateful for. And then the director of graduate admissions for the department I applied to contacted me to ask if I could please get a new letter of recommendation, because this person's letter was lacking detail. It didn't comment specifically on my background or abilities. And then I just realized he was just kind of lazy. And had just phoned it in, and he had gotten his PhD in the 70s when things were different and you could just walk in, I guess. I did go to another faculty like you did, who I think was probably motivated by or felt some some empathy here for the desperateness of the situation and wrote a fine letter and took care of that. And obviously I did get in, but yeah, that moment of crisis right there. So I think it, you know, in some cases it might be good to have a list of more than 3 people that you could potentially approach. As far as getting down to the wire like that, I'm not sure how you could have better handled that. Maybe just a little more check-in or asking offer of assistant or something like that. But I'm not sure. That's a tough one.
Well, I would say shame on that faculty member for agreeing to that in the first place if you're not sure you can do that. So maybe the takeaway is to really have that conversation with the recommender. Like, are you able, can you really fit this in? If not, I totally understand. I will find somebody else. One thing we should mention, I think that's important that Dr. Mox said about his letter not being strong. I also had a similar experience like that thankfully someone alerted me to. This person is not writing strong letters for you. We will be able to see those letters before the final submission. And so to assuage any concerns you may have, you know, if we find something that raises a red flag and says, this is not going to do the job for the student, or there's some problems with this letter, we will have a conversation with that recommender to see if we can get a stronger letter, or if that's not the case, we will help you to find somebody else to write for you. So that's one of the benefits of having the internal deadline being a month before the final deadline, is that we can sort of oversee that process a bit.
Good. Any other questions or horror stories? Well, wonderful. So as I mentioned at the outset, this presentation has been recorded and will be available on our YouTube page shortly. And we also will store it on our Canvas. So once you have access to that, you can use this as a reference again as well. Again, I can't say thank you enough to Dr. Stoff and Dr. Scott Lynch for carving out the time on a Friday afternoon to share their expertise with you. I see a couple of familiar names in there, and that makes me happy. And I see a couple new names, which also makes me happy. And hopefully we'll see you in intake very soon. So thank you all much. I appreciate the time and attention.